You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel. You there?
I'm Daryl Sanders.
All right. And we're your hosts for this show. So tonight, we're actually doing the Phantom Menace. Now, I know you've been looking forward to this. This one, and this one actually, this is a one that was going to be causing a lot of division, I think, among the fans and among a lot of people. You know, we're out of the original trilogy now. We're out of what most people would argue was the really good trilogy. And now we're going to the bad. I mean, I always refer to Star Wars as the good, the bad, the ugly. You know, you had the good, which is the original trilogy. You had the bad, which is the prequels. And then you had the ugly, which is the sequel trilogy. So, yeah, I mean, I thought that, you know, there was... It's really kind of difficult to I don't know, put this in kind of perspective. How would you, if you had to just overall characterize the Phantom Menace as a film, even thinking about when you first saw it, how would you do it? What would you say about it?
You know, when I first saw, back in '99, when I saw the Phantom Menace, I think I was just so excited over the fact that we had new Star Wars, and that I missed a lot of the problems. And even in that, you know, I didn't have the acuity of things that I did later on. Like when I went back and watched them, like, you know, to me the Phantom Menace was good. You know, I thought the whole prequel series was good because it was Star Wars. What could be wrong about it? You got lightsabers, you got all this stuff. But, you know, arguably so, you know, I was 14 years old when the Phantom Menace came out. So, you know, what did I know? um as far as in the sense of dialogue, now granted it didn't look like the original trilogy for me. However, you know, that was the debut of, you know, all the CGI for me. So it was like, okay, you had this whole CGI world, you know, and I didn't know what CGI was supposed to look like. It was brand new. So for me, it was all right, cool. You know, everything looks bright. And I get it because it's, you know, before the war. So I get it. You know, everything is kind of, it will start to deteriorate after, over time. So I really thought that as a 14-year-old kid, Phantom Menace was great. And as I
Yeah.
got older and kind of looked back on it, that's when I started to understand movies, film, things a little bit more, when I had more knowledge of things and seen more, you know, I was like, okay, you know, there were some problems.
Yeah. Uh, there were some problems. So, I mean, basically, so this is the first movie in the Star Wars universe because again, this is kicking off the prequels. This is the first one where the cracks are starting to show. And I remember, so I was, May of '99. I was 28 when this movie came out. And basically, on one hand, you're really excited because for the first time in 16 years, you're going to get a new Star Wars film. This cannot be understated. This was a really important thing in which to frame the rest of this conversation because there's the way that we felt when we first saw this film, no matter how old you were. But I think it was really more my generation because this is the first time, you know, I mean, you know, when we were dealing with you, it's kind of like, okay, you could have conceivably have just finished watching, you know, Return of the Jedi or whatever and gone into it. On the other hand, you did see all these things in the early 90s. So even you had to basically wait for a while. I mean, this is still a new experience for you as well.
Sure.
But I mean, for my generation, though, you know, the people that actually grew up watching this, that actually saw Star Wars in the theater when it first came out, this
Hmm.
is a monumental thing, because this is something that we had been promised for years. George Lucas basically had told us, like, look, you're gonna get, there's this mythical episodes 1 through 3 that have been rumored, and he's had outlines for. I mean, we even found out that they basically had outlines for, he had like 12 episodes initially, and then he cut it down to 9. Well, this is the first realization. And then, of course, the other thing is, well, the last time we left Star Wars was in 1983. What does a late 90s Star Wars look like? So there was all kinds of excitement. And I clearly remember, going into the theater. I saw it with my mom when I first, I mean, unfortunately, working for the school district that we did, during that week that it came out, there were all like these like all the spring concerts and stuff like that. So a lot of my friends were actually seeing it before me. It opened like on a Wednesday. I didn't even see it until like 2 or 3 days later. But in a Star Wars opening, that's an eternity, and especially one that you didn't. I mean, we didn't actually believe that this was ever going to exist, and here it was. I remember when we saw the trailer for it. And I thought that Maul was actually Prince Xizor from the Shadows of the Empire book, because of the way the description was. So there was all this mystery surrounding it, and I remember vividly to this day sitting in the theater with my mom, and that Star Wars, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and that fanfare blurts out, and I mean,
Hmm.
just what you were going to see next. It was just because this is the first time in 16 years that we've had a theatrical Star Wars experience. And I remember some of my friends, and this is what I think happened back in 99, is on one hand, you had this way higher tech version of a Star Wars film. Um, there were a lot more inventions and everything else that, of course, Lucas had in order, to make this thing. And I remember that it was colored by that. On one hand, you had that, but then on the other hand, it failed to live up to the expectations that were set by the original trilogy. So you had this dichotomy going between people wanting to love it, but not really loving it as much as maybe they felt they should have. I guess that's the best
Hmm.
way of explaining it. Ronaldo chats in. He says, I always wonder, there were many opinions at the time about the film, mostly bad, but on a visual point of view, was it what people were expecting? Yes, but I mean, so when you looked at the prequels, especially then, it was undeniable, because once again, the next big leap in CGI was Jurassic Park. Well, really, before that even, the T2 and Terminator 2. That was kind of like a big thing. And even a little bit before that, you had the Abyss. You had the water creatures of the Abyss. So you had this incremental thing going. And I remember that it was definitely a big deal, visually even. And again, Phantom Menace won all kinds of technical awards, because it really was. And I mean, that part did live up to expectations, but what was missing, of course, was the story. And Ronaldo goes on to say, it feels to me, but I can see why other people won't feel that way. Oh, let me get the comment before that. I mean, when you saw the world building and aesthetic, does it feel like Star Wars? Yeah,
So I
kinda.
will say this, like, and here's the thing, this is the biggest backdrop I will say, that this conversation will probably hinge on. I think the Phantom Menace, the story of it was good. It was a good story. The biggest thing was the execution of said story. And I think that, Eric, you probably can agree, or probably would agree to that, that, the cinematography, the CGI was brand new, unparalleled. Like I have never seen anything up until that point like it. So it was like, okay, cool. It's like a high tech Star Wars, film. The problem is that looking back, the way the story was conveyed didn't land well.
Well, and I think that going to that point, I think that one of the problems, because everybody will point to Lucas's terrible directing and the fact that he couldn't direct actors and all this stuff. And to a large degree, I say as a rule, that's probably true. But let's not forget, he did direct the original, A New Hope, right? So
Hmm.
that was fine. I think that part of the problem was that I think he was more concerned and involved with bringing the whole world and his story and everything technologically to the level that he
Hmm.
wanted versus really focusing on the storytelling aspect of it and everything else because and we'll point this out, we had the first fully CGI character. Before this, we just had the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, but this was the first time a CGI character had to interact as a character. And so
Hmm.
I think that that's what really happened, is that you had a film where he was so worried about trying to bring everything up to date and pretty much realize the vision that he had, that basically, like you said, the execution and in particular the directing, giving the actors, because I mean, this is the first time I remember those guys were complaining. Like, we just acted in a big, giant warehouse size green screen. It's just like this big green room, and we have to pretend like there's all this stuff going on. I mean, they were kind of lost. I mean, to be honest, I think it's a miracle that the Phantom Menace is as good as it is, because I agree, and you're right. I think we
Yeah.
are going to frame this on the story was actually really good when you, in hindsight, because I think that there's also two different things that we're going to be talking about tonight too and discussing with you guys. Or if you guys are watching afterwards and you see this and you talk about it in the comment section, there's going to be the reaction and the feelings about it at the time back in 99 when it came out versus what we can look back on now and say, okay, let's take a look at the story. Because now we're not looking at it through the lens of expectations and, excitement and all this other stuff. We can actually take it for what it is now. And let's not forget, and, if we're really being honest with ourselves, we're also framing this around having the sequel trilogy now, where we're looking back on it going, maybe the prequels weren't as bad as we thought.
Well, yeah. I mean, I completely agree, and that was actually going to be one of my major points is the fact that, yeah, the actors, although you had tremendous actors, you had, the likes of um, Liam Neeson, you had the likes of course, Natalie Portman, and you know, um, Samuel L. Jackson, and just like these titans or people who either are titans or who became titans in film as actors, actresses. Um, they have to use their imagination really because they have to like, okay, look over your left shoulder. There's something chasing you, and you have to react to it. And it's like you don't have something that you can emote with or to. It kind of becomes a little bit harder to try to deliver maybe the best, especially at that time. They weren't used to doing stuff like that.
Yeah,
Now it's a little bit more.
I
I
was
was like,
gonna say
okay,
that. Yes.
but at that time at 99, because it was so new, it's like, okay,
Hmm.
how do I even move within this space? Literally, sometimes.
Right.
And it's it could be very daunting. And like you said, Eric, I mean, I'm surprised Phantom Menace was as good as it was, and that's a testament to those actors of just really trying to, all right, I gotta pull from something to make these moments ring true.
Yeah, and you didn't really have a director there guiding you through any of this. It just, it was almost like,
Yeah,
well, just, say whatever, how do you want me to
it's
say
on the
this?
paper
And
and
yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And a lot of times he would write a lot of this stuff. I mean, I remember Harrison Ford famously saying, you could write this crap, but you can't say it. I mean, it's it's one thing that when you get just so single-minded in your vision and you're trying to
mhm.
get something out, you have to remember that, this is inside your head. You have to convey this to the actors so they know how to give the performance that you want. And in a lot of
Yeah,
cases, I think, yeah, they're abandoned to just, well, I don't know, you got the script, just say it. Just
right,
the words are there, just say them. What's the problem?
right.
And unfortunately, one of the things that Lucas did, which he doesn't get torn apart for enough, in my opinion, is you took in some cases like these Oscar-nominated actors and reduced them to these wooden frozen statues that just lifelessly walked around. I mean, it wasn't like you
Mhm.
just got like these first-time guys. I mean,
Yeah, it's not like, Mark Hamill who's, like, not really acted in much.
right.
I mean, you got, like, people like you said, Sam Jackson, Liam Neeson,
Natalie
Natalie
Portman. Yeah,
Portman,
I mean, you got,
you
these
know,
people who are,
you
really
got, like,
understand their
thespian
craft.
Ian McDermott, like, he's a thespian actor, like, these guys have done stage work and all this type of stuff, so it's kind of like, alright, how do you really, expect them to deliver because that's the thing about, acting, it's the presentation of it all. It's
Hmm.
delivery. It's you know, um, you hear people say you have to bring something to the character, and it's how do you do that when I'm essentially talking to a wall? And it's like, okay, there's
Right.
nothing that's bouncing back at me. That energy is not coming back at me with anything. I'm having to do all the work to make that happen. And like I said, at that time, I could see that's being very daunting. Eric, you and I we have our own production company. And some time ago, we were tasked with doing a music video. Um, and we had a character that and that's kind of like what we kind of called him, just the character, is almost kind of like the Michael Myers thing, like the shape, right? And we had a young guy who we brought in to kind of be you had the band performances, and then you had this guy who was supposed to be in this dream world, and he's kind of tormented, and he's trying to figure his way out through this nightmare that he's in. And in that it was like, okay, he didn't even trying to communicate to him, and I can understand like this must have been what it felt like in 99, just trying to communicate with him what we needed from him. And granted, he's not an actor per se like that, so however, trying to direct someone to interpret what you're saying is a very, being a director is no easy feat. You really have to try to have the characters interpret what you need from them. And, we got it done and it turned out great. But when he saw it, his reaction was like, "Man, now I understand what it is that you really want. Like, man, I wish I would have done more. I wish I could have done." And that's the kind of the thing, when you're directing and you're trying to push people beyond their limitations to what they're accustomed to or used to doing. It can be a very daunting task.
Well, yeah, and I mean, looking back on that experience, you know, again, it was our first major music video of any kind to where we were producing more of a high budget kind of a thing. And then one of the things that it made me appreciate was like there's just all this stuff. And I thought I was pretty good at directing the band. I thought that part was cool. Like I was able to get across to them what I needed and they gave me what I needed. But yeah, with our, and I put this in quotes, our actor, because like you said, he wasn't, he was just some friend of theirs or whatever that they got to do this, and he had a particular look that actually worked. And like you said, got it done, but I kind of wish that I guess I took for granted, and I sometimes wonder if this is what Lucas was doing in a way, even though he had far more experience at this, because not only did he direct A New Hope, but by that time he had directed, I think he directed Red Tails. Wasn't he the one that
Yeah,
actually
he direct.
directed it?
I think but that was later though.
That's true. That did come out in the 2000s.
That came
But
out later.
I kind of wish that, because a
Well,
lot
he
of
had
times,
Indiana Jones.
well,
He
but
didn't direct it. That
Spielberg
was
direct
Spielberg.
those. Yeah, see,
Spielberg
that's the
directed
thing.
those. Yeah. So yeah,
And, you
he
can't
just
count
wrote the
Willow
story.
because Ron
Right.
Howard directed that. So, I mean, he basically,
Right.
I think A New Hope was the only thing he had directed, maybe up until that point. I don't know. I mean, unless he did Howard the Duck. He might have directed Howard the Duck, but that was considered a big flop. So, there's an art form to directing actors that at that time, I wasn't really, like, I understood that, but I don't think I knew how to get how to convey that vision, because a lot of the things that we were having him do was just, he just had to do it. It's like, you don't have to worry about why. Just look, stand at this desk and look confused, or, stuff like that. But it's true that once he saw the thing, and that's why if we ever get to do a sequel to that, which there is a song that they have that's a sequel, I think he might be a little bit more receptive, because that's the other thing too. I don't think he wanted to do it, and that's the important thing about the discussion with actors, is when you have these actors that you've hired to basically, you know, act out your vision.
Like, all right.
You have to clue them in fully on what that vision is, and not assume. Because there's a lot of times where I think a lot of directors assume that they are conveying everything, but they're not really understanding how that actor might be interpreting what they're saying. They know what they're saying, but they're not at the other end. It's no different
Right.
if I have like a radio or something. It's like, well, I'm speaking clearly into it. I mean, surely, but you don't know on the other side, it could be all staticky. So I think that's part of what happened. Ronaldo says, did it feel fake at some point? And then he goes on to say, I think the politics are the best part.
So I will
Oh.
say this: huh?
Well, you said so. I said, it's just like, oh, so,
Oh.
instead, yeah, let it
Oh.
go. Let it go and continue. I always forget that when we're doing this, because we're in different locations, it's not like when we're actually together in the same room, that there is a little bit of a delay to when you get, it's like a couple of seconds or something, but it would be enough to throw you off. So that's on me.
No, did it feel fake? I think yes. The world. I mean, comparatively speaking, like you know, looking back now, yes, it looked like Teletubby Land after like Naboo. Looks like some master art class painting or something like that. But at that time, once again, going back to trying to keep yourself in the frame of '99, oh, it looked great. It looked amazing to me because I had never seen anything like that. So yeah, more power to. I mean, yes, it did look a little cartoony in some spaces like the Boo, but like when they got into um like the hangars, or when they were in the kind of like, what was that? I guess the garden area where Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon jumped off the little ledge and start taking out the battle droids or whatnot. Like that looked cool. The whole underwater city of the Gungans, that looked cool. And it was fun because even when they first got to, and you could definitely tell that there was a difference when they were running, when they first landed on Naboo and they were running around from the battle droids trying to hide. It looked more it looked real, like the grass and everything looked organic. But then, of course, when we see like the wide landscape, the wide angle of Naboo, then that's when you got the Teletubby land looking thing. So that kind of will throw you off a bit. But for the most part, um, I really didn't have a problem with it once again because it was brand new. I I thought, the ships and everything looked pretty cool. I mean, they weren't as beat up as the ones we saw in the original trilogy, but we kind of understood that because it's taking place, you know, years and years before that. So everything looked kind of had that fresh, you know, off the car lot looking vibe versus you got rust all on your X-wing and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So, I mean, first of all, I would agree that the politics are among the best parts of the film. And yeah, there were some people that were criticizing, oh, it's a bunch of trade federations and disagreements, and this is kind of like watching Star Wars C-SPAN or something. But really, that's the meat of when you're getting into some of this stuff. That was something that I thought was missing a little bit from the original trilogy. Now, keep in mind, I understand that, as I'm the one that often says, it's sci-fi fantasy. So with the fantasy part, you're not necessarily getting into the minutia of every little thing that's going on, right? It's broad strokes. You're trying to keep it at, once upon a time and a good versus evil and the moral of the story and that kind of thing. But being that Star Wars is so complex, I did think it was interesting that they were beginning to get into some of the politics that led to it, because remember, with episode 4, we're just dropped in the middle of this conflict, and it's you kind of, as a viewer, even though you're on board and Lucas gave you enough information to follow along, you're partially going, I kind of wonder what led up to this. How did these guys get into power? Why are the rebels the good guys? What happened here? And that's basically something that the prequels then started to give us. And then, of course, going to Daryl's point, yes, I've often said that Naboo looked like Teletubby Land, and there was a little bit of a cartoonish thing. And in some cases, because CGI, at least at that level, was really new, there were some somewhat really, I guess, sanitized versions of things. But as Daryl also alluded to, in this case, it worked in their favor, because the idea was the universe was supposed to be very pristine and clean back then. You look at, and it was also where you actually had aesthetic, right? It's not a totalitarian government yet, where things are more functional. And you actually had a sense of design, like the Naboo starfighter and things like that. And I think that, these are the things really that make a difference. And in a way, even though it does betray a little bit of the fact that the technology was new, you definitely did get at least somewhat of a sense that it was part of the story and that it was really working, at least for this one. You could make the argument maybe in later episodes, not so much. David's with us today. And he says, "Hello, gentlemen. I'm glad you're both well. Really enjoyed the aliens. I thought Lucas did a great job with the diversity of characters. Very creative. It seemed authentic." And again, I think that when you look at this in hindsight and you don't have a lot of the expectations and you take things for what they are, and then, of course, you compare it to the sequels, prequels probably start to look pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, the whole going to your point, back to your point, Eric, the whole politics of it all. I love the politics because, it really, like you said, it gives you the backdrop of the canvas to which all this is predicated upon. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
because when you look at A New Hope, it's not a war, it's a battle. They even call it the Battle of Yavin, right? So I wouldn't necessarily call that a war. And then in Empire, there was no war. The only thing that kind of looked more like a war was that space battle in over, Endor.
Well, but I think here's
And I
what
don't
you
know
got to
if
look at. It was a war because the rebels, all you're talking about is what you actually see on screen. But during the
right.
time of the Empire, you had a lot of uprising. You had, people all over, and it was That's part of the
Well, that's
reason
what
why
I'm
it was
saying.
dirty, it's grimy. The Empire basically put everybody in destitution, I guess.
Yeah, and that's my point. Like we didn't see that. We didn't understand where all this like we just knew like okay, the rebels were just upset. Okay, they got this big ball that's blowing up planets. All right, we blow up their ball. Now they're mad at us. So now they want to come back. And it's just like, okay, well, what the heck? Like where did this even come from? Why do we even, I mean, why should we care? And it's like when you get to the Phantom Menace, now you start to see and you understand the emperor a whole lot more. See, and this is where that comes into play because okay, well, how did he become the emperor? Like, was he always just there? And you're seeing the matriculation of his ascent to becoming the emperor. And it's like, okay, he started off as a senator from Naboo. This is how he was kind of starting to play both sides here a little bit. You're getting the pieces to the puzzle. And then now as we start, going through um Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith. Now, when we get to Revenge of the Sith, it all makes sense now. So by the time we get to a Rogue One or New Hope, it's like, okay, now I have the framework of all of this and
Oh,
why the
yeah.
rebels are the rebels and everything like that. So,
Right.
but you have to start somewhere. And unfortunately, the beginning of things are usually slower, a little bit more boring, a little bit more drawn out because you have to set the backdrop for it all. But then now after that, once you have the Clone Wars, now things start exploding after that.
Yep.
But we get introduced to, a bunch of stuff. Like right now, the Jedi Council is up. And it's like, okay.
Right. And we'll get to that too. Because, yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, really, The Phantom Menace is the beginning of a trilogy of introductions. I mean,
Hmm.
that's really the best way to put it, right? It's the trilogy of introductions. This is by far the best way that he almost had to take the entire trilogy to, in essence, frame up episode 4 because he dropped us in the middle of this thing. So now he has
Hmm.
to go back and he has to try to, um, frame that up. And so, in the spirit of all that, we could start basically talking about some of maybe a few of the specifics because we kind of went, through the whole story and everything, right? And what we had. So now we could start to take a look at some of the things that we are introduced to in this, and one of them, of course, is that we get to see a very different Jedi in this
Hmm.
trilogy, and particularly in this film, because remember, we're essentially going in release order. So we went through A New Hope, we went through Empire, we went through Return of the Jedi. Now we're going back to Episode 1. And from what we've seen so far of the Jedi, it's been their fire has gone out of the universe, as they say. And all you really saw was basically Vader, who became a Sith Lord, and then you saw Obi-Wan a little bit, and then Luke, who was basically a Jedi in training, and we kind of grew with him. Now we're actually seeing the Jedi, not necessarily in their prime, because that was more the High Republic, but we're definitely seeing them fully formed. These are
Y-
Jedi that have been at it a while, and they're the
yeah,
full
I mean,
peacekeepers.
yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing. We get to see multiple Jedi and we get to see them of all different races, colors, all of that, and that was really cool because, up until then, like you said, we only knew Obi-Wan, Luke, and Yoda,
Hmm.
and it's like, okay, well, now we get to see once again Yoda's at the head of the table and he's got this kind of council, and that's not all the Jedi, that's just the council.
Right.
When you got and you get to see even more of that when we get to the next film, but you see, okay, everybody's kind of like you have all these different people who contribute to the overall direction of what the Jedi should be doing, and and you get to see their actual purpose.
Yeah, and what I like about, right out the gate, basically the first scene of the film, we're seeing a young Obi-Wan, and
Hmm.
we're basically now seeing his master, Qui-Gon. And I thought that that was kind of a nice dynamic because in the previous trilogy that we were looking at, we saw Obi-Wan as the wizened old master. Now we're seeing him as the Padawan. You know, he's not yet a Jedi Knight. So, I thought that that was actually pretty fascinating. Now, Ronaldo's got this really interesting question that we have to get to now. Normally I would wait and let's blow through some of these slides, but this is a good one to address. He says, I wonder how big was Darth Maul in the marketing of the movie? And the interest,
huge.
Yeah, kind of, but not until later. Because in the beginning, you saw him in the trailer and you just kind of saw a little bit. Like I said, I thought he was Prince Xizor from Shadows of the Empire. So they kept him very mysterious when the movie opened. It was only after the movie opened that you then started getting the onslaught of Darth Maul everything. But in the beginning marketing stages, not as much as you would think.
Well, they did show him with the double-bladed lightsaber in the commercials.
Yeah, but that was just,
And
like I said, I mean, and that kind of went along with Xizor too. They didn't really, you didn't know anything about him. They used him very sparingly. There was that one close-up where he kind of ignited the lightsaber, you know, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah,
And
but I think that alone, though, at least I can say for maybe my generation, I'll just say that, like that was everything for us because it's like, okay, who is this guy? You know, because like, okay, after Vader, what are you gonna do? You know, it's
yeah,
like,
but I mean,
okay,
that's a scene. So that was something that you latched onto, but that doesn't necessarily, that's not a marketing campaign. That's just you saw that and flipped out along with all your friends. You know?
You don't think that's a marketing campaign though? I mean, because you gotta think about like, okay, if you're going back to tell the story essentially of Darth Vader, and you have like everybody up until that point, like if you brought up Star Wars, like Darth Vader is synonymous with Star Wars. Like you can't mention Star Wars without Darth Vader. So if this is the story about him, and you see this other guy who looks menacing, just like Vader was menacing, except for in a different way, and he's got like this advanced, what was seemingly to be an advanced lightsaber. You know, it's like, okay, you want to go see what this guy's about because you know if you grew up watching the Emperor and Vader run around and terrorizing the galaxy, well, who was this guy? You know, and it's like, okay, and then you got, you know, you see Anakin, I mean not Anakin, you see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon kind of ignite their lightsabers too. So you're like, okay, you obviously know he's a bad guy. He's got the robe, he's got the face paint, the horns, and you know, he's got the Sith blade. Okay, who is this guy? So I would say that's a marketing thing. Like you want to go see or find out who this guy is.
Well, but the thing is, though, that you have to think in terms of the marketing, right? We didn't know anything about him. They marketed Anakin. That's who was actually the big prominent marketing thing. The posters where they showed little Anakin and then the Darth Vader shadow. That was a marketing campaign. These are all things that are actually marketing campaigns. I wouldn't count a shot of Darth Maul. Yes, they put that in there to pique interest, exactly for the reasons you say. Well, who is this guy? But if you go back and you look at all the posters that were leading up, and you go back and you look at all the interviews, you look at all the actual marketing that was done for this film up until then, it was mostly marketing the idea that Anakin was going to become Vader, because that ended up being the point. They wanted to introduce all that.
Oh,
See,
yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I agree with that.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Sure. I mean, you're going to look at that and your mind's going to wander. But that's not a campaign. That's not a marketing campaign. That's just, what are we going to put in this trailer to make people want to go see this movie? That's going to be something that you're going to look at and go, like you basically said, well, who is this guy? You know? Oh, cool. They're going to actually have, because up until then, I mean, we knew that the Emperor was going to be in it as a senator, but we didn't really know if there was going to be a traditional villain or not. And then, of course, I think, I could be wrong on this, I think in you know how they always have your teaser trailer and then you go on. Well, I think eventually, by the time they got to the TV trailers where they're just basically trying to show stuff, they may have had a little snippet of the Maul versus Qui-Gon scene on Tatooine. It seems to me like I saw something about that before the actual film, but I'm not sure because, 99. It's been
Well, I
a
do
minute.
remember. Well, I do remember. You're right, but I do remember that they did have that one scene where Maul was talking to the Emperor,
Oh,
and it
maybe
was like
that was it.
last
Yeah,
week
yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
had
The
that last week
last,
of reveal
yep.
ourselves to the.
Okay, that's
So we
probably what
knew
I'm
the
thinking
Emperor
of.
because I remember we knew the Emperor. It's like, okay, he's in it, so
Mhm.
sweet. But then it's like, well, who was this other guy? And
Right.
then you see the face, but then later on in the trailer, you see him take the hood off, and he's got the horns and the double bladed saber or whatever. And you're just like, okay, well, who the heck is this guy?
Yeah,
And sure, like, yeah, I definitely agree because you have to market it towards because that's the story. The
that's the
story's about
story.
Anakin. So I
That's
mean,
and
yeah,
that's
I mean,
it.
obviously,
And that's where
because they kept
all the
showing like
marketing went to.
yeah, they kept showing, Jake Lloyd turning around and you see this innocent, cute little boy, but sometimes he would have this scowl on his face, and then he's, flying pod, doing the pod race thing that was heavily, marketed as far as in that regard. But I think, um, but like even the poster, like you say, like with all the, and this is a typical Star Wars thing too, which to me they always have the coolest
All
posters
the
to me.
multi-character thing that they always do.
Yeah, the multi-character poster. Yeah, and then you had like that shadow of Maul and like his tattoos and stuff was in the background. So I remember that. Like, so that's why I just said like in the marketing of it all, like I always thought that Maul was a big part of it because he looks so different and so cool. It's almost kind of like how you all
Right,
looked at
but
Boba
again,
Fett in
I
a
mean, and
way.
that's gonna be a key scene or something in trailers, and that's definitely gonna pique your interest, and you're gonna wonder who he is. But obviously, they're
Hmm.
not gonna give the marketing campaign is gonna be designed to, hey, this is what the story is, this is what we're because you have to remember, especially for those of us who grew up with the original trilogy, the big reason why we wanted to see this was we wanted to see why Anakin and how he turned into Vader.
Absolutely.
Honestly, all the other villains are secondary. We already had our villain. We want to see how that guy becomes a villain. To us,
Hmm.
the only thing that really mattered was the Emperor and Vader. You could put
Well, my
anybody
thing
else in
was
there.
I thought that guy had a role in how he became Vader. So I
Well,
think
I
that was
wish it
kind of
had been Caesar because I really like his. See, the Prince Caesar storyline in Shadows of the Empire, he was actually he ended up he was the head of the Black Sun cartel or whatever.
gang, yeah.
He ended up finding favor with the Emperor, and he kept sabotaging Vader like every step of the way. And then Vader, it was kind of a cat and mouse between both of them, kind of sabotaging each other to win the Emperor's ultimate favor. And then, of course, I don't remember, I think Vader may have killed him or something, or at least pretty much disposed of him somehow. But the point is, that character would have been an amazing foil. Now, of course, it would have been a little early considering Vader was a kid. And that's
Hmm.
another thing that I remember we have talked about ad nauseum is they really should have started this thing with episode 2. Ultimately, who cares about a 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker? Which I'm sure we'll get into, as some of this stuff goes on. Ronaldo says, I saw a review where the reviewer said that Maul looked so interesting and cool because it was so non-Star Wars at the time. Would you agree? Hmm.
Um,
Nah, not really.
I,
I don't. I mean, you look at all the stuff from the original trilogy. I thought that Maul looked cool when I first saw him, but he didn't necessarily look non-Star Wars to me.
yeah, I think it was just something that we didn't expect to see. I think
Yeah,
that's maybe the better
right.
depiction.
Because it was another Sith Lord-like guy. We didn't exactly. Yeah, that was true for us as well. David said, I thought Darth was anticlimactic until he fought Obi and got cut in half. You must mean Maul.
No. Um,
Oh, yeah, New Hope,
he's
right?
yeah. No, he's talking about. Okay, so he thought Darth Maul's was anticlimactic until he fought Obi-Wan and got caught in half. Super cool. You think Ra's al Ghul's could sword fight better? Um. Oh, he's talking about Qui-Gon.
Yeah. Yeah, he must be talking about Qui-Gon. Really wish you
He's
would
talking
learn to
about
use a
Qui-Gon
real...
because
You gotta learn the characters'
he
names, David, before you comment, man. We don't really want to
he's
spend a half hour like deciphering your comparisons.
yeah, because Liam Neeson played Ra's al Ghul
Hmm.
in
I
Batman
know.
Begins,
I get
so
it. I mean that part,
I
yeah,
was
that part made sense.
yeah.
He's
I wish
alpha
he would have
level
survived. He's an
actor.
alpha level character actor.
Yeah, I mean, without question. And again, and this is something that we're going to explore more as we get deeper into this, because especially when we get to the battle scene, that the whole battle between Qui-Gon and Darth Maul was really the most important battle of the entire saga. There's very few people that would
Yeah,
argue that.
yeah.
And then of course we got Chad. Says, when do we talk about The Last of Us? You know what? I still
You
have to
should.
watch it. I still have to watch it. I
Oh
played the
man,
game. I played the game and I couldn't beat the first monster or the first whatever. I don't remember. It's been a couple years because I got it for
were
the
you scared like
PS4.
Adam?
No, I wasn't scared. It was just, it was, that was kind of funny though. It was kind of frustrating though, because it was really cool. I remember when the game was very first announced for the PS4 anyway. So I think there was an earlier version too. But on the PS4 it was announced and it was one of these like revolutionary type of things, and I started to play through it and yeah, I got kind of frustrated. Now they put out a remastered version for the PS5 that I would be kind of curious to get and maybe play through again. So yeah, I'll have to check that out. Well, there you go. We just talked about The Last of Us. Um, David said, to clarify, Darth's fighting was disappointing while fighting Qui-Gon, not him as a character. Um, well, I mean, I don't know. I would flip that around, because when you go, especially if you read the Phantom Menace book, they go on and on about how Qui-Gon was like this master Jedi swordsman and he was one of the best of the Order.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, not
Yeah.
seeing it. I'm going to have to take your word for it. Maybe he must have had an off day or something.
Well, that was the thing about that's another thing about this time period. So once again, laying the backdrop of all of this, when they approached when Darth Maul finally reveals himself sort of to Qui-Gon the very first time on Tatooine, and they had their little squabble. Qui-Gon was winded, and he was just like, okay, number one, they were already kind of running in that blazing hot sun and in the sand, so that's tiring even in and of itself. But then you got to have this whole lightsaber duel, with a very formidable Sith Lord, and then okay, you finally escape and you get out of there and you go back to the council to report, and they were saying like he believed it was the Sith Lord, and that's when I believe it was Mace who made the statement that the Sith haven't been heard of in over a millennium. So they were, as Jedi, they weren't used. I mean, yes, they practice, their lightsaber techniques and things like that with each other. But one, they're not trying to harm each other, and they're not trying to, kill one another. And quite frankly, at that point, there's like, okay, well, who else would have a lightsaber besides us? They're we're training for more against blasters and things of that nature. It's deflecting that type of stuff. So to run across somebody who actually not only has a lightsaber, but actually truly knows how to wield one. Um, that was the off guard point for Qui Gon because yes, given his master Count Dooku, or as in David's terms Dracula, Um, it's Dooku was a master swordsman. I mean, we all know that his skills with the lightsaber were like, pretty much unmatched, and then because his master was Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you look at the lineage of, it's kind of like in martial arts, we kind of trace back our lineage to like, okay, who was your master's master? It's the same way. And so when you look at it, like, yeah, no wonder why Qui-Gon, yeah, I don't doubt it. But it was the fact that it's like when you don't use those skills anymore
Right.
in that
Yeah.
manner, it's like, of course, when you run across someone, it's kind of like, oh, this again. Like I haven't done this in ages.
Yeah, and especially, is furious when Maul just jumped Qui-Gon and Tatooine, it's kind of
Hmm.
like, I mean, that was just, in my
Yeah.
eyes, that was probably the most brutal of the lightsaber duels. I mean, when you really, I actually prefer that in a lot of ways to the ending one, because it was just, I mean, it was on. It reminded me a little
Hmm.
bit more of some of the duels that we got maybe in episode 3, like the Obi-Wan Anakin or the Emperor Yoda, that kind of thing. So,
Well, it also kind of reminded me of uh Vader in Empire when he came at Luke on that bridge and he was just hacking away at him. Like Vader
mhm.
was just really going at him. He wasn't kind of playing around and teasing. He was really, pretty much going for broke at that moment.
Yep.
And so that's kind of how Qui-Gon had to respond to it at the time, was like, man, like where did this guy come from?
Yeah, and
So
that's immediately goes to the council like, "Guys, we have a problem."
yeah, dude, we encountered some things
Yeah,
out here that you might want to know about.
we've seen some things, and just saying, a storm is coming. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, the next thing, of course, that we can address here is that there's a new army, right? So we're used to seeing stormtroopers up until this point. Now we're seeing these battle droids. You had the little rolling droid decos, and um, you had all the weird little variations. You had all the tanks that
Hmm.
we came to learn that if you guys have been watching the Bad Batch, the last episode, we got a healthy dose of some Clone Wars era stuff. So this is kind of the beginning of that. And it was really cool to actually see this fully droid army. I have to admit, they did end up getting played a little bit for comedic relief, which I thought
Hmm.
was okay, but maybe a little much at times. Because
Sure.
they could have been a little bit, at times, they were actually kind of menacing. I thought that maybe that could have been handled a little bit differently to where they could have been a little bit more menacing and threatening than they ultimately were.
True. Yeah. They were too silly at times,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. That was kind of my thing. But that I thought was pretty cool. And then of course, we've been talking about it a little bit off and on throughout the show. But we get our first CGI character, and of course, arguably, this is the character that basically, in a lot of ways, sank the film for a lot of people. And I have to admit, I hated Jar Jar from the very introduction of him. Couldn't stand him. My parents loved him. It just goes to show you. But I think, and again, this is George Lucas, from the silliness of the battle droids to Jar Jar's whole thing. Again, he always made it clear that he's, first and foremost, Star Wars is for kids. And
Hmm.
this is one of the biggest problems of the Phantom Menace. We didn't really say this earlier in the show, but we should have. And that is, one of the first issues that you have is that, so we were the kids when this original trilogy first came out. Like I said, I was like 6 years old or something when A New Hope came out. In fact, when it was first released, it wasn't even called A New Hope yet. That happened when it was re-released in, like, I don't know, 78 or 9 or something. But essentially, this is the first film where now you have to market it to two different demographics, because where it was marketed to kids, we got a lot out of it, but then there's also, because of the richness of the characters and the vastness of the universe and everything else, there's so many really cool stories that we could tell that we kind of expected Star Wars to grow up with us. Instead, there were certain elements where that happened because obviously, you have a lot of the politics that's in this thing. You have characters like Obi-Wan, Yoda, then of course, Mace coming in, some of the newer characters, things like that, where they're basically extensions of what we already know. You also have this whole little kid thing going on. And that's really what Jar Jar more or less represented was, okay, this is a kid part of it. But, being in our late 20s, it's like, no, move past this. Star Wars is ours. That was the problem. And that's what's been happening with each subsequent generation, which is why I think that you're getting somewhat of a convoluted content problem where Lucasfilm is trying to market all these different Star Wars things for different demographics. It's like, okay, well, we got the guys who grew up with this now are in their like 40s and 50s. And then we have, younger generation that's maybe like in their 30s. And then we got kids, it's like they have to try to create content that speaks to each of them.
Well, and that's the thing though. Like to that point, the problem I have with it is like I don't mind it being for kids, but if you look at the tone of A New Hope, okay, you saying Star Wars was for kids in the original. If you look at the original trilogy, you didn't have characters like Jar Jar running around.
That's true.
I mean, the closest thing you might have had, like you might have had some cute little thing like the Ewoks or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, but they weren't like they weren't so goofy
Right.
as Jar. I mean, like this guy was practically like I can't say that. It's 2023. I realize I can't say certain things. But
yes, join
let's
our
move on.
Patreon that we'll
Yeah, right.
we'll give the non
I'll just
PC
say
version
this.
of this stuff.
Right, but let's just say, Jar Jar wasn't the most mentally adept individual. So,
Yes.
and, it's kind of like you didn't have characters like that in the New Hope or Empire or Return of the Jedi. You just told the story and you got it.
Yeah,
And
give kids
that's my
credit
thing.
for being
Yeah,
sophisticated enough to pick
you
up
don't have
on
to
this
dumb
stuff.
it down for them. Yeah, you
Right.
don't have to dumb it down for them, and that's
Mhm.
that's why I feel like that's another societal problem. But instead of trying to elevate everyone's thinking, we have to dumb everything down for
Mhm.
them because it's like, oh well, you can't get this, so let's just force you. Let's just take all the nutrients out of everything and just give you what's left. So it was. I mean,
Well, from a
and this
technical
character
standpoint,
eventually.
it was amazing. Right? I
Well, yeah,
mean,
and that's what I'm saying. Like, if they would have kept him, they could have kept the character and just not made him so goofy and just made him kind of like a kind of a fun companion. You could make him fun without making him.
well, and that's the thing. I mean, being that this is a new race that we're introduced to, the Gungans, I think that one of the things that he was trying to go for was, let's make a character who's basically an outcast, who's, it's as we see in this thing, he was pretty much not like all the other Gungans, and the other Gungans look down on him. And of course, he ends up being one of the heroes. And then, as we see in the next film, he even ends up becoming a senator. So I think that the message for the kids is like, even the outcast can eventually get, I guess, like some sort of a, not really a redemption, but, can,
Can have
uh,
their place, like
yeah, it can
in
have
the
their
world, but
place. Right. But they
and they
made
can
him
still
too
be
stupid.
important in their own way. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like they could have done the same thing without dumbing it down, and that's the only problem I had with the character. It was just like, okay, because the way they played it, it's kind of like his character, like in the real world, would never be a senator. Like, come on now, and that's just
I don't know. Maybe now.
well. Well, yeah, some of our senators and people we got now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
some
you
of the
might be
guys
right,
that we
but
have now, I mean, I don't know, but yes, I mean, that's the thing, is that you have to make it somewhat believable. I mean, look, he's the guy that's going to break Palpatine, where Palpatine's just going to be like, okay, that's it, I'm done, and just shoots him in the Senate pod with his Sith lightning because he just can't take it anymore. And they did make a
right.
wise decision. I'm sure we'll brush on this when we do Attack of the Clones next week, but where you'll notice that with each subsequent film, Jar Jar says less and less, to the point where we just see him in Revenge of the Sith. He doesn't even have a line, so that's
Right.
cool. And then, of course, David, which this is one of mine too, he says, my favorite line of the whole movie was, the ability to speak doesn't make you intelligent.
Yes, when Qui-Gon uttered that, man,
Yeah, that was
good writing right there.
That was great writing, and it's, I mean, yeah, you have to look at these things, I think, from that standpoint. But from a technical standpoint and everything, no matter how you feel about the character, it was kind of an amazing thing, and it did represent a step forward in filmmaking. Now, of course, we've done shows like when we did the whole thing on, the whole AI and the deep fake and all that. We could probably do a whole show on, I mean, was this a good thing ultimately or a bad thing? Because now you get all these movies that are all CGI and, there's no story left and everything else. All right, so now the trade dispute. So that was when we were introduced to the character of Newt Gunray, of course. And you're starting to get the separatists versus the Republic thing. This is where this is being seeded. I don't know if I would necessarily go as far as to say that this is the catalyst for what ended up becoming the Clone Wars, but it definitely was a very important element of it, right? Because obviously Palpatine arranged this because it's like, look, you got to surround my home planet of Naboo, so that way it drums up a bunch of sympathy, so then I can call a vote of no confidence in Senator Valorum, and then because it's my planet that's the one that's essentially being surrounded and persecuted, they'll end up voting me as Supreme Chancellor. Now, again, there's a lot of things that have to be put in place in order for that to happen. But one of the things that we see as this trilogy goes on, and especially in the Clone Wars, Palpatine had a bunch of contingency plans. It wasn't like you can make the criticism of, okay, dude, do you understand how many things have to go right in order for this to work? Because at least Lucas was smart enough, and some of the EU writers at the time were smart enough to demonstrate the fact that Palpatine wasn't counting on just one thing in each stage going right? Like, there were many different things. I mean, I love, of course, the line where, he says, "Get this stunted slime out of my face," and
oh yeah,
when he expresses that, worry about the Jedi. I mean, this is the beginning of the Senator having to deal with the Jedi, and as the films go on, especially with Attack of the Clones, when he's Supreme Chancellor and he's got to deal with them, it's kind of funny in a way, because you're basically seeing Emperor Palpatine having to be all like, cool and everything else with like Yoda.
He's got to toe the line and be this.
He's got to be
almost like he's benevolent and like he cares, and he really doesn't.
He really doesn't. And that's why I loved in Revenge of the Sith. When we talk about that, I'm sure we'll talk about it in even more detail. But when he's just like, man, I've been wanting to do this since.
Right. I waited a long time.
Yeah.
For this.
I mean, it's just like a lot of the dialogue going back and forth was great. It was just fantastic for that. So I thought it was cool in this film that they actually began with something that's very grounded, very, just political real world. Like, look, there's this whole trade dispute thing. We're going to put this blockade on this planet. It wasn't so fantasy. This is a little bit more, I guess, sci-fi-ish and grounded in, what we face today.
Yeah, definitely very grounded. It's one of those things where you're like, okay, this is the political chess pieces moving around so that you
Mm-hmm.
can kind of figure out, like, okay, this is how everything unfolds eventually.
Right, right, right. And then, of course, from there, like we said, it was kind of cool to see Palpatine, looking a little less disfigured.
Ghastly.
Yeah. That part was kind of cool. And it was great to see him in this role because, again, we basically see him starting in this film. We see him in both ways, right? We see him as the kindly, humble senator that's just trying to help his planet. And then he throws that hood up and he's Emperor
Put your
Palpatine
hood
talking
up.
to the other side. Yep.
Dark
So, I mean,
side.
I thought that
So
was really cool. I mean, I think it was amazing the way that was handled, actually.
yeah, I mean, that's what I love, the fact that he's playing this double agent, and basically he's
Mm-hmm.
playing both sides of the fence, and he's orchestrating uh this whole movement, to position himself to be um launched as the new Supreme Chancellor. So yeah, I mean, that was, the whole plan, like, kidnap uh the Queen Amidala, you know, hold her hostage, almost basically as a ransom to do certain things. And of course, that's going to make the Republic hate the Separatists even more. And then this things like makes the Separatists look like, okay, they're achieving, they're fighting against the big bad Republic that wants to do their thing. And so it's the whole, the right hand doesn't know what the left is doing. And, you know, only Palpatine, who's the mind of all of this, is basically being the puppeteer, and he's just kind of controlling everything from from his seat.
Yep. And then, of course, David says, I love seeing the goat rise to power. And I finally saw his face. Put your hood up. Daryl, hold up your Sigma sign. That's what he... But, I mean, he's got a point, though, because, again, this is one of those situations, like we've been talking about, where you cannot understate the importance of seeing Palpatine at this stage, because now... And again, I would even like to see the origin, right? Like, I'd like to see, how did Palpatine get hooked up with Plagueis, and how did he fall to the dark side? And, I mean, that would actually be kind of cool as well. But at least from the saga perspective, we needed to see Palpatine at this stage, and I thought that was great. And then, of course, you mentioned that he's kidnapping the Queen. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about this whole thing was you had Queen Amidala, right? And then you had all of her little handmaidens. And then Padme is actually, the Queen's actually pretending to be her own handmaiden. And she had her decoy. And, that whole thing I thought was kind of a nice touch. Even though there are certain elements... Again, some of the conveniences, like when they're on the ship and they're being attacked, and it's like they send all the astromech droids, and oh look, R2-D2 happens to be one of them, and oh, R2-D2 is the one that survives, even though the other ones are picked off literally in succession. R2 happens to survive, happens to save the day, then you get the whole little, what's his number? Oh, R2-D2. And you're just like, okay, stop.
Well, I mean, hey, it's the will of the Force, man. That's the whole thing. You gotta... That's kind of
our...
bow to the will of the Force.
That's kind of our crutch. But I mean, it was just like, dude, this is terrible writing. I mean, it's just so stupid, But you have to let it go. Natalie Portman, though, did, I thought a really good job, especially with the material that she had pulling this off. And then, of course, the whole Anakin Padme thing, which was a little creepy at this point. Because, he's like 9, she's like 19 or something. Might not necessarily fly today, but again, it was really more him having kind of a crush on her. She wasn't really, like, focused on it, even though she ends up having that little necklace thing that he made for her. Which, by the way, plays a little bit into the comics that I had been reading recently, which is really kind of sweet. But, yeah, I thought that... And again, along with the R2-D2 thing, having Anakin being the one that built 3PO, I thought that was kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the Anakin Padme thing, the way they played it in this was this is where things got terrible for me, like especially the writing. Like
yeah, like that
the
whole "Are you an angel"
like
thing.
him trying to flirt with her, dude. It's
Yeah.
like, I mean,
Are you an
don't get me
angel?
wrong, like,
It's
I mean, I did things like that when I was 9, but but I mean, my thing is, it's kind of like, okay, I can understand. See, I would love to have seen like Padme be more like, I guess more motherly in a way, or at least a sisterly vibe to him, and it was like, okay, and Anakin just had the crush. I mean, and it's not like, Padme was looking at Anakin like, ooh, when you get older, it's not like she was
yeah,
looking
exactly.
at him like that, but she's not grooming him or anything. But
it's like, how old are you
it's
again?
all
So
right.
you'll be
I'll
18.
hang around.
Hey, who knows? Who
Right.
knows what the age of consent is in the Star Wars universe, right?
You could be a senator at 12. I mean, who knows what
I
you
mean,
do at that
hey,
point, but
so,
but I mean, but I mean, I just feel like the cultivation of their relationship um should have been very benign. It should have been very kind of like, you know, she likes him because he's a cute kid, it's like, oh, you're such a cute kid, and of course he could have that, young man, older woman thing going on for him. That'd have been fine. Until Attack of the Clones was like, okay, that's why I like it kind of shifted a little bit in Attack of the Clones when she was like, oh, you've grown up. Like, all right, you don't look like the same little 9-year-old anymore. So I mean, I like that aspect of it in that point. But yeah, their whole relationship here was kind of like almost unnecessary in my opinion.
yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong, they didn't really overdo
The introduction
it,
of
really.
them is cool. Yeah, like the introduction of them cool, but like, you know, them really having, and they really didn't interact a whole lot because it would have been weird.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, it
what was she
wasn't
gonna do with a 9-year-old at that point?
right. It wasn't too bad. And then David, of course, comes in with, it says the politics were necessary. Daryl told me Star Wars is more than lightsabers. You can't have Star Wars without the politics. Now I see what you mean. And see, that's the thing, is that the more you get into all the content, I mean, you really you can get the essence of what Star Wars is about really by just seeing the first 6. Because that was Lucas's pure vision. And as far as he was concerned, it was complete. He did have ideas for episode 7, 8, and 9 that, of course, weren't used. But by and large, 1 through 6, you get a feel. But the more content you even get into, like the Clone Wars animated series, Rebels, you start getting into some of the other stuff, you really begin to understand the complexities of, what Star Wars is. And then again, I mean, I kind of alluded to this before, but it's kind of like, see, 3PO's origin, they're meeting R2-D2. I mean, I get it. They have to, I guess, try to explain some of this stuff. Especially if you make the decision to put R2-D2 and C-3PO in there, I suppose it makes sense to do it, but I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, it does give a little bit of explanation when in Empire Strikes Back, Boba Fett's about to shoot 3PO and Chewbacca and Leia or whatever, mostly like Chewbacca, and he kind of like moves his hand down. There was a lot of theories that, he recognized 3PO and he didn't want him to get hit, but I don't know, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think.
I mean,
I don't think that would have been. I mean,
no, and it doesn't really make sense if you think about it. I mean,
it doesn't at all. I think that scene was more so like he didn't want anything bad to happen. Like, okay, either you hit Solo or something like that. Well, no,
yeah,
Solo
I
was
mean,
already
right. No, he
in the
was
car.
already
But
in
I mean, my thing is
carbonite,
like,
but
if
yeah,
but if you destroy like the machine, well, now I can't use this now. It's like, okay,
right,
look, this
right.
is not
That's
necessary.
far more plausible.
Yeah.
David goes on to say, I thought I was the only one who thought the relationship looked weird, but hey, you got to respect him because he got her in the end. Plus, what's worse, incest or pedophilia? Well, yeah, I mean, you have to hang with, the Luke and Leia thing.
There's that, yeah.
That's the thing. It's kind of like, but, she was good. She waited. But again, I mean, I thought that in a lot of cases, a lot of this felt rushed, I mean, you had the whole, and we'll get to this a little later, Anakin Skywalker meet Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that was cool, but it was a little like, all right, dude, we get it. You don't have to push it on us quite that hard. Anakin happens to build 3PO. R2 happens to be the one. I mean, it just seemed like they were really trying to shoehorn getting all these characters together. They could have maybe taken a little bit more time, introduced somebody in 2. I mean, I don't know.
Gotcha.
And then, of course, we have what ultimately becomes part of Anakin's undoing is his mom, Shmi Skywalker. This is where we find out about the Star Wars virgin birth, where Shmi's like, yeah, it really wasn't a father. It wasn't like, I was drunk one night. I have no idea. It could have been one of like 5 guys or something. No, it was kind of like, nope. Just kind of sitting here minding my own business. And yeah, looks like I'm pregnant. Now, of course, there's a ton of theories. The biggest reigning theory is that Palpatine actually was manipulating stuff and caused it. That he's basically gonna pretty much engineer his own apprentice kind of thing. Which, if that turned out to be true, I think that would be kind of cool. But given the information that we have here, this is, of course, the beginning of where Anakin's fear comes from and his attachments. And we find out later that part of the reason why he turns to Vader is because, look, I'm trying to stop people from dying. He's afraid of losing people, that kind of thing. So this is, of course, something that Yoda sensed when he first meets Anakin in the council chambers. It's like, we can't train this kid. He's like full of fear and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about Anakin is this, his attachment to the ones he loves, and that we later find out, that's one of the reasons why they try to keep that away from, the Jedi, because it will cause you to make decisions that you might not that you should not have made because of your attachment. You can't see the greater good because I'm worried about, well, yeah, forget all these millions of people on this planet. I got to go save my mom.
Right.
Right. And it's like, okay, well, what do you do, in that situation? And so if we eliminate that attachment to you, then you only have to worry about what the mission is.
And then, of course, we also have Watto, who's the pretty much the slave owner, which he ended up being. I mean, he was pretty cool to them. Which, of course,
Mm-hmm.
later on, when, Anakin comes back and meets him, which I thought was just awesome. It's
Yeah.
like he didn't really have any bad feelings. And, of course, Qui-Gon sees this as an opportunity. And that's when you have the whole, first of all, he tries to give him credits, and that doesn't work. And then it's like, oh, I got this chance cube. And, of course, he uses the Force to
Mm-hmm.
manipulate that. So I thought that whole thing I actually thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, the whole bargaining because, and this all stems from the fact that Qui Gon sensed something in Anakin. He was like,
Right.
okay, the fact that you're the only human who can, and that's something that shouldn't be understated. He was the only human that could do pod races, because pod races, are you're going at exceptional speeds, and there's all this danger that's afoot, and you have to be able to have the reaction
Hmm.
time to make split second, like almost nanosecond decisions to keep from being pulverized. On top of that, you got people trying to sabotage your pod while you're, speeding around. I mean, you got a lot of stuff to go on. And the fact that you're a 9-year-old kid, you're not even an adult, you're a child, and you're able to basically get behind the wheel of a NASCAR, you know, and be able to zoom around a track or something like that. Like that's not normal, And
Oh,
so
yeah.
that definitely would pique
Yeah.
the interest of Qui-Gon. Like, okay, well, you must have Jedi reflexes, because how else would you be able to do this?
Right.
So that's the
Right.
whole, premise for him trying to procure, if I can use that terminology, Anakin,
No,
because
and
it's
that's
like, all
and
right,
that's yeah, I mean that's basically it, right? He senses this and he knows that he's special. I don't think he thinks he's a child of the Force yet, but he knows, all right, there wasn't a father. I mean, something's going on here. This kid could, do pod racing when a human shouldn't even be able to do it. Yeah. Yeah,
mm-hmm,
there's some things happening here. And then of course, we get to the pod race, I mean, once again, this was a technical marvel. This was something that was actually really cool to see, both from a filmmaking perspective, but then also when you bring this into the storyline. I personally thought maybe this went on a little too long, though. I mean,
well, we could have done without all the pageantry of the pot race. That could have been gone. They could have just started the stupid thing. Um, we didn't have to necessarily see him building the pod, but I know they were trying to reinforce the fact that, like, okay, Anakin is super technical. Like, he's good at tinkering things. He can build stuff. He can fix things, and that's why he was so valuable to Watto. It's like, because,
yeah.
okay, I find this junk out here. Okay, this little kid can fix anything, and I can resell it. So, for almost like new,
And
basically.
he
And
can
so
bet on the races too, because Anakin was
yeah,
winning
so
them.
then yeah, so the fact that he saw that Anakin had this exceptional ability to do a lot of different things, he really didn't want to lose him. Um, but that pod race, so like you said, from a technical standpoint, yeah, I mean, this was really cool to see on screen. You know, Once again, the CG was phenomenal on this, from the designs of the different pods, and the actual race of Boonta Eve, including the sand people trying to pick off people, I mean,
Which I thought was a
just
great.
creating the
It was great to
yeah,
see
that
the
was
sand people
hilarious.
in this, because I mean, you'd think, look, it's Tatooine, they're gonna be there.
You
The
kind of
other
forgot
thing,
about them, honestly, until they
I know,
started picking off people like,
I
oh
know,
yeah.
which was awesome. And then, of course, later on, when you see them in the Book of Boba Fett, I mean, it just, you
Hmm.
really get more of a sense. And again, and this is the thing, is that all the Star Wars content enriches itself. And then, of course, when we see Jabba the Hutt attending the pod race, and he's,
Hmm.
you know, it, once again, it's showing that, hey, this guy, he's got a
Has
pretty
his
good
hand
hold
on
on
everything.
Tatooine. And he has his hand in everything, which is really cool. Um, David, of course, sharing some insight into Star Wars. When we were talking about a lot of things that deal with pretty much a lot. Anakin's fear and all that. That sounds like Buddhism, the whole fear making you abandon duty thing. If I remember correctly, Buddhists aim to detach themselves from the physical for focus on the spiritual. And yeah, I mean, a lot of the Jedi was based on a lot of that Eastern philosophy stuff, right? So
Yeah, Buddhist monks,
hmm
absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
and that's what I'm saying. Like,
a little bit of
George Lucas
samurai
borrowed a
too,
little
I mean,
samurai. Yep, the code of honor that the Jedi follow versus, um, you know, and it's kind of funny because you kind of have the samurai thing, which is Bushido. That's kind of like their code of honor, and then the ninja being more like Sith is that's kind of their whole thing where they don't attack you in conventional ways. They use um covert methods of actually winning wars and winning their objectives by any means, whether it be poison, whether it's infiltrating certain things, and that's all the Sith. So basically, you have a lot of Eastern philosophies that are taking place between the Jedi and the Sith, and yeah, like you said, um, George Lucas borrows from everything. He's taken the fairy tale stuff. He's taken, stuff from Flash Gordon. He's taking things from, Eastern mythology and Eastern philosophy to really cultivate his own uh, space opera, basically.
well, and then speaking of the Sith Lords, right? We've got the guy we've been
Ah,
talking about, Darth Maul. So now we see a little bit of the expansion of that. And what's cool is
hmm
he doesn't pop up that much, but when he does, it's really significant. And I mean, some of my favorite scenes, again, are the ones that wouldn't necessarily be the obvious. Like, I actually prefer the Tatooine lightsaber duel in a lot of ways over the ending one. The other thing I loved was the whole dialogue between him and the Emperor. The
hmm
whole, at last we'll reveal ourselves to the Jedi and have our revenge, that whole thing.
Yeah, I even liked for his very first appearance, which was I'm sending my apprentice
Oh,
Darth
yeah,
Maul,
Darth
and they show
Maul,
him
he
in the
pops up in the
and then they
hologram.
yeah, he walks into the hologram, and then
Mm-hmm.
he looks taller than what he is, and then you see him walk with the Emperor. It's like, oh, he's a shorty.
Yeah, I
you
know.
know.
That was actually one of my favorite things. Like, wow, dude, might want to get him some lifts, But
Yeah, exactly. You got Liam Neeson who's like 6'3",
right.
but this is Ray Park playing, the famous stunt actor Ray Park. He played Nightcrawler in X-Men, and he's been in a lot of different. He's an accomplished martial artist. So getting this guy to play Darth Maul was really sweet. Um,
Well, and another fun fact, actually, the Johnny Depp movie, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which had Johnny Depp and
mhm,
Christina Ricci in it. So Ian McDermott was actually one of the townspeople, and Ray Park was the Headless Horseman. So,
yep.
there was a little bit of a Star Wars connection on that one too. But yeah, I mean, we talked about Maul a lot through this whole thing, and it was cool to actually see a new Sith Lord that was not a clone of Vader or anything like that, because he's the first guy, and that's something that we can actually say about each of the ones that appeared, right? Because then Dooku was different in the sense that he was a fallen Jedi and all this other stuff, so he kind of had a different vibe too. So
And this,
that was
yeah,
nice,
I agree. Yeah, one of the things too about this is in this movie was the first time we actually hear the word Sith.
Well,
I
that's
forgot to
true.
mention that,
Yeah,
but
that
this
is
is
a
the
good
first time
point,
we
Ed.
actually hear
Yeah.
the actual term for them, and that's Sith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. This is the first time. And then, of course, we had been showing this picture the whole time. This is the thumbnail in our thing. This is also the first time we get to see the Jedi Council, which,
hmm
that can't be understated because, again, another key scene was when Anakin, or not Anakin, Qui-Gon tried to make the case for Anakin, like, hey, look, this guy's the chosen one, all this other stuff. And Mace is like, yep, we're not training him. Yoda's like basically going, oh, yeah, you got like fear and all kinds of other stuff. And we get the big reveal. Of course, you also see Yaddle over there in the corner, and we had a big
hmm
Yaddle episode for the Tales of the Jedi. Find out what happened to her. So I mean, there's a lot of really cool elements of, um, the whole Jedi Council and the hierarchy behind that, and again, even meeting Mace Windu, right? It's kind of like, oh, well, this guy, I mean, he's second to Yoda, so who's he? Now we find out more about his deal naturally in Attack of the Clones. So we'll probably talk about him a lot more in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, but you get the sense that he's somebody that has earned his place as second in command.
Yeah, one of the things I loved about this whole scene was the Anakin kind of mouthing off to the council for a little bit. He's like, "What's that got to do with anything?" And Yoda's like,
Yeah,
"Everything."
yeah.
You know, it's kind of like, but I can understand it from Anakin's perspective. Like, okay, but that just once again just shows you he's too far gone in his ways and his thought process to really be able to truly embrace the Jedi way.
Well, and we've often said, I mean, and again, like I said, one of the reasons why that ending duel is so important is because had Qui-Gon been the one to train him, because he's similar to Anakin in a lot of ways and he understands that mindset, I think he would
Hmm.
have had a different outcome. Or at least, even if it was a similar outcome, I think that, Qui-Gon's influence, I think he just would have been a better overall master for Anakin. I remember we said that in one of our shows where we were talking about
Hmm.
that at length, actually. The M word. Midi-chlorians. Yeah, this is another misstep in the whole thing where Lucas decided, instead of using that absolutely perfect description that Obi-Wan gives in episode 4, now we got to do a little bit of a sci-fi thing, and it's like, oh, well, I mean, his not even Master Yoda's midi-chlorian count is that high and all this other stuff. And I get it. They're trying to establish that, listen, the Force is really strong in this kid. And they
Hmm.
were trying to quantify it in a way. And I think that it just kind of lost a little bit, by trying to explain it too much.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing they were trying to do, I don't think they were trying to explain so much the Force as much as how powerful
Mm.
or his potential power was, and you have to kind of make it relevant. And how do we know that? Because it's like, okay, we've all seen, well, I'll say we all, but most of us have seen, Empire Strikes Back. We know what Yoda can do. We know how powerful Yoda has been, and we hadn't even seen what Yoda is to come. And when you do see that, it makes that statement a little bit more, have more gravitas to it, because it's like, okay, his force potential is greater than Yoda. So if Yoda's the head of the Jedi Council and he's the bar, right? He's the measure of the highest you probably can go. I mean, this guy's been studying the Force for like hundreds of years, right? And his race tends to have a natural affinity for it. This human eclipses him. How? And it's like, how do you explain that to an audience who's already seen what Yoda can do? And this kid, like, yeah,
Well,
he's moved a pod race around a bunch. I mean, you could just say it, but
well,
like, how do you know that though?
I would just say it like this. He was conceived by the Force itself. The Force is his
But you,
daddy. It's, I mean, really, if you stop and think about it, and again, that's what a fantasy film does. And of course, that's what they eventually do. I mean, they do eventually explain that, but
sure.
they could have just done it like that. And that, hey, listen, I mean, you got a guy who studies the Force, you got a guy that's a direct descendant of the Force. Not to mention the
Hmm.
fact that they never once mention anything about Luke Skywalker's M count. I love it. I love it when Filoni ended up doing that for The
Hmm.
Mandalorian. That was great. I mean,
Well,
I get it.
that's
It's
the
a
thing though.
measurement.
Yeah, I mean, it's overall. I know what they were trying to do.
But again, I mean,
just
what it does is it takes the Force out of anything mystical, and now it's something that you can measure with a blood test. I mean, come on. That's
yeah.
where I really have issues. It's like, now you're making it medical and scientific, and that's not what the Force really is. But they went there, so, it's kind of part of it. And fortunately, they didn't dwell on it. I will give them credit for this. They did not dwell on it. They just kind of put it out there, and, then they basically had, Anakin asking the question that we were all asking. Hey, what are midichlorians? It's...
Right.
And then, of course, we get the big scene where Anakin meets Obi-Wan, and of course, this is a big thing in the trailer. I remember this is another thing that they were heavily marketing and all that. You're gonna find out. Anakin will eventually become Vader. We know that, but now he actually meets Obi-Wan, and it's like, how did these guys get hooked up, basically? And this was. I mean, the line was a little on the nose to me, but I did enjoy the fact, especially because Obi-Wan, what was the line where he basically referred to it like, oh, great, that's like another one of your strays or something?
Oh, it's like, another another stowaway or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. He was basically like, it was another one of your strays, because he was referring to, okay, first Jar Jar, now there's this kid. It's like, really, dude? Who else are we gonna,
pick up along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed Obi-Wan's frustration at that moment. I thought that was pretty cool. But, needless to say, this is the first time that we basically meet him. Of course, R2-D2 is in the picture at this point. We're starting to get the band together, so to speak. And then, of course, the rest of the Gungans, because there was that whole other storyline where the Gungans and the, I guess, normal people of Naboo. I mean,
the humans.
Yeah, the humans or whatever. It's like there was a little bit of tension there.
Yeah.
And of course, when they realize that, hey, listen, we can continue fighting, and Padme made that really good speech, especially when she revealed herself as the actual queen and all that stuff. I mean, that was, was actually kind of a cool little moment, I thought, because Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were really trying their best to unite these people, and it was a good lesson. Like, look, the Jedi can't do everything. Sometimes you guys have to roll up your sleeves and solve your own problems. I mean, the Jedi can help you do that, but, it took the Queen to actually say, listen, we don't think any less of you guys. We didn't even really know you were there. And I thought that was cool.
I mean, it was cool, the fact that, they kind of realized, we have a common enemy, but once again, and nothing bands people together than a common enemy. It's no different than, any other thing that's happened in our country, right? The attacks on 9/11 brought our country together. People put aside their differences because we had a common problem that affected us all. So, and that's one of those things that, it's familiar story tropes that happen in life, but it doesn't date anything. And that's, once again, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I mean, what I really thought, too, was when Boss Nass, at first when they were trying to get his help, he was like, hey, that's your all problem up there. We're fine down here.
We're good. We're good down here.
They're not, But then when they started bombing and invading, their whole thing, and they had to flee and go to their secondary place, it's like, oh, you know what? All right, we're going to give you guys a little bit of a second listen here. Let's...
Well, yeah, it was kind of like, Bad made pretty much sound like, okay, it's on, they're targeting us first because they don't know you're down here, bro. What do you think is going to happen once they do find out that you're down here?
Yeah. So, I mean,
that was... that we kind of get together and stop them now. That way,
absolutely.
And
that was, that was cool. And then, of course, you have the multiple battles, right? So this one is the ground battle, commonly referred to as the Battle of Naboo. This is the one where, what a great scene when all those droids were coming out of that ship and, just like,
oh yeah,
just stacks of them. And it was like this,
like hanging chickens or something like that until they unfolded themselves and
or like a big dry cleaner kind of thing, where everything's like on hangers and on these automatic things. But it was really overwhelming when you saw that. And of course, when the Gungans basically had those like really cool shields or whatever that they could put up, until of course the droids figured out they could just walk through them. I mean, I thought that the battle, it wasn't super spectacular. I remember even thinking at the time that, there's elements of this that are really cool, but I think it just lacked substance. It was pretty. It was, like like older folks would say, like whiz bang or something. It was kind of a.
Well, the thing is, yes, the thing that bothered me is that it's essentially you got two goofy people fighting each other. You got this dumb little droids like Roger, Roger, and hey, where did that go? It's you got that.
Yes.
And Misa do like, okay, man, this is like watching two kindergartners, fight each other. It's like, okay, it's just cute and stupid and all, but
Well, and it just
like, I didn't feel any weight behind this at all.
That's exactly it. I mean, it just didn't feel like there wasn't any gravity to this, and it
was so slapsticky, like, them flinging the little energy balls at people, and it's just like,
yeah,
okay. Like,
I mean, it didn't quite feel Star Warsy, actually.
No, not at all. That's the part that didn't feel like Star Wars, and this is where the writing really started to suffer.
I
It's
agree.
like this is where things really got bad because you're building this whole thing up to this point, and then this is what you give me. It's like, okay, Jar Jar gets a field promotion, and he's about to take out half the people because he can't swing the stupid ball there. One ball is like bouncing down, and it's making the sounds of boom, da boom, da boom, da boom, and it's like, okay,
I know,
like really, like this is just, oh my god, like,
I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, and in the theater, you're watching this and you're going, it's almost like you're shocked. Yeah, I mean, you can't believe that you're seeing this. I mean, and you want to like it because it's Star
screaming
Wars,
like this,
right?
Like,
I mean,
it's just like. Oh my god, this is I can't.
I mean, it really isn't very watchable, but again, it is pretty. It is pretty. And then of course, the flip side of it, which is a little bit more of the serious side, now you have Padme taking in a bunch of her agents, and then they go in and then they retake the palace. This part felt more like Star Wars. This part was like, okay, this is kind of cool. I like this. Newt Gunray and his, I always forget the other dude's name, but
Viceroy, the other Viceroy.
Yeah. I mean, they're basically a pair through the whole thing. And I thought it was really cool because Gunray actually thought that he had the upper hand the whole time. And why wouldn't he? He had the backing of the Emperor. I mean, of course, the lines that I absolutely loved, when he's like, is that illegal? And he's like, I will make it legal. I thought that was cool. But of course, the best was when the Emperor said, wipe them out. All of them.
All of them.
It's the way he delivered that line, man.
Well, one of the funny lines to me was like, shoot her or something. Like, like do something about her. Like,
it was it was just, there's a lot of really cool moments in this. And that's the problem is that, so you have two things that were cool, two things that were bad. The next thing that was bad was a space battle. Because it really wasn't one. You had a little bit of the Naboo starfighters going up against the Separatist ships, but it didn't last very long. Most of it was Anakin, this is pod racing. Oh, well, I'll turn it this way. Oh, let's go left. Oh, let's go right. And, I mean, it's just
this is a good trick.
Yeah,
like,
right. It's just like, really? And then, of course, he ends up...
into the thing.
that whole scene, the whole thing, it just completely ruined it for me. And there wasn't
Yeah.
enough substance other than that, and then of course, even though Anakin ends up blowing up the ship, you're mad. You're mad because this kid accidentally bumbling his way through this.
Yeah, it's like the Three Stooges in
Yeah,
space.
exactly. Which of course is the perfect marriage to that bungle of a ground battle. And
Yeah.
you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, is this is the big Star Wars film that I've been waiting for. But then again,
Yeah, because when you compare against that space battle to like the attack on the Death Star, I
I
mean,
know, right?
there's absolutely no comparison.
Either one.
Yeah,
And then of course,
either attack.
we get
Right.
to, of course, the other cool part, which is a big
This is where
lightsaber battle.
This is where it gets saved.
Yes. The attack on the palace, that was cool. This was really cool. And then, of course, you had the flip side of it where you had the hokey space battle and the bumbling ground battle, basically. So you're kind of on the fence because there's half of this stuff you like or love, and then the other half you're like, eh. But, this was cool because, again, this is the first time, when George Lucas first introduced this thing, he had told the actors in A New Hope, no, these things are heavy and they're like broadswords and, they're hard to swing. Well, by the time he got to the prequels, it's like, no, they're light as a feather. You can flip and do weird tricks and, do all this other stuff. So
go behind your back and flip
Yeah.
and spin.
double-bladed lightsabers
Yeah.
and everything. So you actually had a dynamic battle because in addition to that, they're using, their super speed thing. They're using their telekinesis. They're
Yep.
using all these different force powers in addition to these spectacular lightsaber battles. Now, of course, in universe, because there were people that were like, oh, well, this Maul guy looks like he could take out Vader. It's like,
No
because
way.
as you get more powerful, you realize, well, I don't have to jump around like a maniac. In fact, I leave myself open to attacks sometimes when I do this. So,
As Darth Maul very, very much so learned in this.
yeah.
That was his undoing.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the thing. And that was another cool thing. Which, of course, in this, we thought, it's too bad. This Maul guy was a really cool character. It's too bad we're never going to see him again.
How wrong we could be.
He ends up being like one of the most prominent characters in all the stuff that follows, which is hilarious. Which just shows you. I always point to that too. I'm like, every time somebody's like, well, I don't know, he might be dead. I'm like, no, he's not. Well, yeah, but he did whatever. It's like, yeah, Maul was cut in half. And fell down a shaft. I'm pretty much thinking that nobody dies in Star Wars. When Luke Skywalker basically uttered that in Rise of Skywalker, like, nobody's ever truly gone or whatever. I'm like, well, yeah, I got my man Darth Maul over here that proves that.
So it's Palpatine flying back into the...
Palpatine flying back in, it's like, look. But again, as we said before, this ended up really being the battle for the entire future of the galaxy. And people didn't really realize that. I don't even think they realized it back then. But when you really take the saga in totality, you see just how much is at stake with this thing. Let's see. And then, of course, we have the whole master apprentice thing, right? Because once Maul has been struck down, now Yoda and Mace are kind of having a, like a, well, which one was it? We know the Sith, there's always two. Which one did we kill? Which I think...
And this is all while they're watching Qui-Gon, burn.
Right.
Having his whole...
Right.
pyre, the whole funeral pyre for him.
Well, and it's another good point too, and I should have brought this up in the last one. Qui-Gon is the first time that we actually see a lightsaber death where, nobody disappears or whatever.
True.
Because we thought back then that that's what happened. A lightsaber hits you, you just disintegrate. We didn't know that was Obi-Wan doing his thing. So we could see that, you could get stabbed. And actually, in this movie, I will say there was a lot of really cool lightsaber stuff. Like, the lightsaber was definitely the star of this film. I mean, you had that really cool thing where Qui-Gon's pushing it through that blast door, and it's, all melting it and stuff. And, you just had a lot of really cool lightsaber moments in this film. So
absolutely.
I think that that's good. David's got a couple of comments that pertain to this. He says, everyone's little next to the goat. I liked at the end when they asked if he was a master or apprentice. It was an ominous foreshadow setup piece. And then, of course, Samuel L. Jackson. Need I say more? And that's that's it. And I mean, that was a really great bit of casting. And again, this is one of those things where it is very ominous. I mean, you look at the lighting and everything, and you could tell that they were concerned, that they're sitting there going,
Yeah, like, they're saddened by it all, but at the same time, they have, like, it's like in their mind, it's like, we have bigger fish to fry now. Like, we got to figure this thing out. Because now we have to remember, like, okay, so we thought wasn't the case is the case, but now the new case is, which is it, master or the apprentice?
Yeah.
So
they gotta get on this.
And then I love that shot that they did when, like, after they did that, they asked that question. They had that shot of Palpatine at the pyre, and it was just like, it was just like very, like David said, very ominous and foreshadowing.
That was so cool. I mean, that whole thing. And again, this just goes to show there's a lot of things. Even though we are somewhat bagging on this film in a lot of ways, look, there's a lot of things this movie got right. So that was one of it got right. And then, of course, this is another really good one, another foreshadowing, actually. It's kind of like, I'll watch your career with great interest. It's like, yeah, you will. Because, you're looking at your new apprentice. And they're sowing the seed. And, of course, we'll get into this much heavier in the next film. And then even heavier in the final Revenge of the Sith. But this is the beginning. This is the sowing the seed of that master-apprentice relationship. Because, first of all, Palpatine has to win his trust and become that fatherly, he's the guy that's going to listen to Anakin. He's not going to be like Obi-Wan and criticize him. And that we'll look at more of the juxtaposition next week when we do Attack of the Clones, but this is a beginning.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really cool, it's once again, you're seeing that Anakin is meeting basically his second master in a way. Before it happened, it's like the foreshadowing of it all. And like you said, I watched your career with great interest. Like, yeah, I bet you will. Because
and what's what we were all saying in the theater, Yep.
And I'm sure he's feeling, he can feel the force from Anakin at this point. He's like, oh yeah, you're what I'm looking for. Like, you're powerful. I can feel it. And, and that's crazy. The fact that, once again, as David likes to call him the GOAT, because the fact that he's standing this close to Obi-Wan.
I know.
And Obi-Wan doesn't feel any darkness around him.
I know.
But yet Palpatine can feel the force through them. It's like, how do you do that?
Well, and
it's like, I'm blocking you out, but I can, it's almost like a two-way mirror. Like, I can see you, but you can't see me, and it's,
well, and that's it, right? Because this is a zenith of the dark side. This is when Palpatine is able to block the dark side. And then, of course, we learned from Lucas during the commentaries that Yoda then flipped the script and blocked the light side during the original trilogy, which, of course, we talked about in our review. If you guys missed our review of any of the original trilogy films, it's there in our whole What is Star Wars series. In Return of the Jedi, we talked about that, right? Where he's like, well, my son's down there. And, Palpatine's like, I don't know, man. Are you sure? Because I'm not feeling that. So you see a little bit of that, right? And another thing that I really liked about this, too, is if you notice in the picture, you kind of have the blue version of the Royal Guard. Like, the Royal Guard thing is starting to make its appearance a little bit. Yeah, exactly. There's like a little bit of an evolution. You can see the dude's face still, and eventually they'll be red, and you can't, Really, really cool stuff. And then of course, finally, everything's happy right now. The calm before the storm. You got Padme there. You got Boss Nass. Palpatine standing in the midst, and that was kind of weird too because the big villain of the whole saga, essentially, is all standing with all the good guys, and they're all smiles, and everybody's getting along.
Mm-hmm. Even you got Anakin, his little Jedi
His little new
from the Baby Gap.
Padawan. Yep.
Yep.
He's got his new little
the
Padawan
haircut.
cut. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, overall, I thought that, again, there was a lot of things that the Phantom Menace did right. Kind of like you said earlier. The story was good. It was just the execution. That was really...
Yeah.
And there were enough problems in this film that just held it back, I think, from being considered a masterpiece. Even though people are now taking a second look at it and going, well, maybe we were a little
It's not
too
as
harsh.
bad as we said it was, but it's still not the greatest Star Wars movie, but it's
That's
not
the
as
thing.
bad as when people once thought it was. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know. I would almost make the argument that it is. It's just, we have a new, a new bad with the sequels.
With the sequels.
And that's because really it's an execution problem. It's not a story problem. It's a directing problem, but it's not really a character problem. So you have a lot of these things. In other words, there's enough good in the thing that you can almost overlook the things that are bad. Whereas when we get to the sequel trilogy, it might be a little harder to do that. So.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Are we rating these? I don't even remember. I honestly don't remember. This is like the fifth or fourth one we've done.
I think this is more of an explanation, or just.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. But just to err on the side of caution, if I were gonna rate it, I would probably give it a 7.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, because it was good, but again. And I have to say, guys, we were supposed to do this this past Monday, but we ended up getting, under the weather, and then of course there was, the whole thing that happened to the Friday show. That's going to be uploaded tomorrow. David's got this question I want to get to before we end the show. He says, "How do you distinguish what's bad directing or bad acting?" That's a good question. Basically, bad directing, you can always tell bad directing, first of all, with the whole acting aspect of it, because what a lot of people don't realize about the director's main job, everybody looks at him as like the boss of the movie, which I mean, there's a certain...
He's
the producer,
one of them.
Yeah, the producer is really the boss of the movie. The producer or executive producer hires a producer. Producer hires a director. The director's really the boss of the look of the film. They're not really the boss of the film. That's why they'll always, say, oh, this is a Martin Scorsese film or a Steven Spielberg film. It's because they're responsible for the overall look of it and the feel of it. But if you're really getting down to it, because the director of photography really is the one that kind of controls the look and all that stuff, it's, of course, the director's telling him what he wants, but then it's up to that person to get it. But the director's main job is the actors. They're directing the actors. And...
Well, I will say... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to compare this almost like, I know, David, you're a huge, basketball fan. So it's the same difference, in my opinion, of good coaching versus good players.
Yeah.
Like, certain people just bring a certain... they can internalize and they can figure out what this... character needs, whereas a director kind of sometimes they allow them to if they're going to be in control, they're going to let sometimes the actors take it on, and they control how much of that is. It's like, some coaches allow certain players to call their own plays because they trust them to do it, because they know that they have the chops to do that. And then sometimes you have to manage everything. Like, okay, hey, instead of doing walk in this way, they're controlling the DP is more like the overall look, like the visuals of it, but the director is controlling like the
Well, there's the blocking. There's
blocking, the movement of
everything.
how you walk
Everything.
into a room when you do something. Okay, I need you to look at it. Like when you come into the room, immediately turn to your left. Don't wait. Just go to it. It's more so like that because it's how it looks on
And how you
film
say the line. This is the way I
and
want
how
you
you
to say
deliver
that
it.
line. How you deliver the lines, how you do all that. Like you said, an actor can do it. I mean, to be honest, if we were really to do justice, like what's good acting versus bad acting, we'd have to do another show on that.
That's true. And
Because,
maybe we should one day,
yeah,
for
I mean,
Star
that,
Wars.
that might not be a bad thing to take a stab at doing. Maybe try to bring a guest on that's, knows more than we do about the whole thing. Because, I mean, we know, but it's not like an actual director actor would know. So,
Hmm.
that's one of the things. But you could tell, I mean, because one of the things that you can look at when you look at, say, the Phantom Menace, really the entire prequels, because one of the problems is the acting. The acting is very wooden. It's very stiff. It's not very natural. The way the lines are delivered, it's not. If you compare the way it was in the original trilogy to here, it's night and day.
Hmm.
It's not organic enough. And a Natalie Portman, of Samuel L. Jackson, a Liam Neeson, these guys are way, way qualified to deliver 100 times better performances. But they were even as tactful as they were trying to be. We're trying to say, look, I mean, he didn't really give us much. We didn't know what he wanted. Just like, well, just say it. I mean, Lucas doesn't know how to interact with actors. Every actor that's ever worked with him has said that about him. And so it's really hard to, give him what exactly it is he wants, because he's not very good at conveying that to them. And so that results sometimes, and it got better. Like the acting is definitely a little bit better in Revenge of the Sith. Kinda, but you'd still had the same problems. Not to mention, like I said, I mean, you're an actor. You're in the middle of a green or a blue warehouse. It's like, pretend there's an entire city full of people, and you're interacting with all these guys. And it's like, well, they're not there. See, if the volume had existed back then, it probably would have been a better thing.
Sure.
But it didn't. So, oh well.
There it is. There's that.
There it is. So hopefully you guys enjoyed our critical analysis of the Phantom Menace. Of course, this is part of this whole What is Star Wars series that we've done. We started out with the legacy, what makes Star Wars. And then we began going right into the original trilogy. And we've reviewed and analyzed every single one of those movies. And of course, tonight we did the Phantom Menace. Next week, we'll be doing Attack of the Clones. And, we'll keep going even through the sequels and the standalones and everything. So you guys aren't going to want to miss that. If you guys did miss anything, go back, take a look. It's all there. If you're new to the channel, this is the first time you've ever seen it, you like this kind of stuff, you like talking Star Wars, this is where you're going to want to be. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button. And of course, if you like the video, hit the like button, because it really does help the channel. So again, tomorrow you'll see the release of what would have been our Friday show. It's going to be the Episode 4 review of The Bad Batch Season 2, so you guys are going to want to check that out. And then, of course, coming up this Friday at 8, we'll be live again, reviewing Episode 5 of The Bad Batch. And again, next Monday, 8 o'clock, come right back here, because it's going to be Attack of the Clones. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.